Chapter 4. There are moments in life when a person's entire world changes. Not because something new happens, but because they finally learn the truth about things that were there all along. For Serena, that moment began with a lie. A beautiful lie. One she desperately wished were true. Because after overhearing the council's discussion about the Eastern Princess, she spent the next week convincing herself of something she didn't want to believe. The Alpha King had never cared about her. The kiss meant nothing. The protectiveness meant nothing. The stolen glances meant nothing. And the way he had thrown himself in front of an assassin's bolt, that meant nothing too. It had to, because the alternative hurt far more. The alternative suggested she had fallen in love with a man who might actually love her back. And that possibility was far too dangerous. So she avoided him. Or at least she tried. The problem was, avoiding Alpha King Kael had become nearly impossible. Especially when the king seemed increasingly determined to find reasons to see her. A report needed organizing. A diplomatic archive required translating. A historical record demanded verification. Every task somehow landed on Serena's desk. Every task somehow required direct supervision. And every task placed them together. Alone. The first few days after hearing about the arranged marriage were torture. Because Kael noticed immediately. He noticed everything about her. The way she avoided eye contact. The way her smiles seemed forced. The way she became quieter. More distant. More guarded. And the more she withdrew, the more unsettled he became. By the 8th day, he could no longer ignore it. The opportunity arrived unexpectedly. Rain hammered against the castle windows. Thunder rolled across the mountains. Most servants had already retired. Most nobles remained in their chambers. Only a handful of lanterns illuminated the royal library. Serena sat alone between towering bookshelves. A half-translated document rested before her. Her eyes scanned the words. But her mind absorbed none of them. Because every thought eventually returned to the same place. The same man. The same impossible future. You've reread that paragraph 6 times. The deep voice nearly made her jump. Her heart stumbled. Kael stood beside the shelf, watching her, as though he'd been standing there for several minutes, which he probably had. The realization sent warmth flooding her cheeks. She immediately hated herself for it. I didn't hear you arrive. The king moved closer. Rainlight danced across his features. You've been distracted. Not a question. An observation. The kind only someone paying close attention would notice. Serena looked away. I'm fine. A lie. Both knew it. Neither acknowledged it. For a long moment, silence settled between them. Then unexpectedly, Kael spoke. When I was 13, I used to hide in here. The confession startled her. Because kings rarely spoke about themselves. And Kael almost never did. Her eyes lifted. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze remained fixed on the rain beyond the windows. My tutors hated it. A faint smile touched his mouth. I would disappear for hours. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Kael considered the answer, then laughed softly. The sound held no humor. Because books didn't expect anything from me. Something about those words struck her deeply. Because she understood exactly what he meant. For the first time, she saw beyond the crown, beyond the power, beyond the legend. And what she found underneath surprised her. A lonely boy. A lonely man. Someone who had spent his entire life being needed, but rarely understood. The realization hurt. More than it should have. Because loneliness recognized loneliness. And suddenly, she wasn't looking at a king anymore. She was looking at someone who carried invisible wounds remarkably similar to her own. Kael finally looked at her. golden eyes steady. Quiet. Honest. You understand that. It wasn't a question. Serena nodded slowly. The space between them felt smaller somehow. More fragile. More dangerous. Then the king said something that changed everything. I know about your former mate. The air left her lungs. She froze. Not because he knew. Everyone knew. But because of the sadness in his voice. The genuine sadness. As though the memory upset him personally. He was a fool. Serena stared. The statement was so immediate. So certain. So sincere. Her chest tightened painfully. Because nobody had ever said that before. Not once. Most people pitied her. Others blamed her. Some ignored it entirely. But no one had ever suggested the rejection was his loss. Only hers. Kael stepped closer. Anyone who made you believe you weren't enough was a fool. The words shattered something inside her. Something she'd spent years building. Years protecting. Years hiding behind. And for one terrifying moment, she wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe every word. That was when she noticed it. A folded paper sticking halfway from a book near the king's chair. Old. Worn. Accidentally exposed. Without thinking, she reached for it. Kael reacted instantly. Too instantly. His hand closed around hers. Warm. Strong. Urgent. The moment froze. Both stared at their joined hands. Neither moved. Then Kael slowly released her. Too late. She had already seen the paper. And, more importantly, the sketch. A sketch of her. Serena blinked. Confused. Then stunned. Then completely speechless. Because there was no mistaking it. The woman drawn across the page was her. Reading in the castle gardens. Months ago. Long before the banquet. Long before the kiss. Long before any of this began. Silence stretched. Thunder rolled outside. Neither spoke. Neither seemed capable of it. Finally, Serena whispered. When was this drawn? Kael looked away. A rare occurrence. And somehow that frightened her more than anything else. Months ago. The answer barely registered. Months. Months. Her mind struggled to process it. You knew who I was? The king laughed softly. A tired laugh. Almost defeated. Of course I knew who you were. Her pulse accelerated. Why? The question hung heavily between them. Why had the king noticed her? Why had he remembered her? Why had he watched her? Why her? Kael's gaze returned to hers. And for the first time since she'd met him, there was nowhere to hide. No walls. No masks. No distance. Only truth. You were always helping people. His voice remained quiet. Even when nobody thanked you. Another heartbeat. Another confession. You smiled when you thought nobody was looking. Another. You treated servants and nobles the same. Another. You never became cruel despite everything that happened to you. The room felt too small. The air too thin. Her heart beat too hard. Because every word carried the weight of careful observation. Years of observation. Months of noticing. Months of remembering. Months of caring. And suddenly, the kiss looked very different. It wasn't random. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't meaningless. The realization shook her completely. The king had noticed her long before she noticed him. He had admired her long before she ever imagined it possible. And perhaps most dangerous of all, he had cared. The truth crashed through her like a storm. But before she could speak, before she could ask the 1,000 questions now flooding her mind, the library doors burst open. Kael's beta appeared. For the first time since she'd met him, the man looked alarmed. Genuinely alarmed. My king. Something was wrong. Kael straightened immediately. What happened? The beta's expression darkened. The letters. A strange silence followed. Kael's face lost all color. Serena frowned. What letters? Neither man answered. And that terrified her. Because suddenly, both looked afraid. The beta swallowed. Then delivered the words that changed everything. They've been leaked. The world seemed to stop. What letters? Serena repeated. Slowly. Reluctantly. Painfully. Kael closed his eyes. Just once. As though bracing for impact. Then he answered. The letters I never sent. Her heart skipped. What? The beta's voice cut through the silence. They're everywhere. Outside. Castle bells suddenly began ringing. 1, 2, 3. Urgent. Relentless. Dangerous. The beta's expression turned grim. The entire kingdom knows. Serena's pulse thundered. Knows what? Then she saw it. A letter clutched tightly in the beta's hand. The king's handwriting. His seal. And beneath it, words written by a man who had tried desperately to hide his feelings. A man who had failed. Because by sunrise, every noble, every merchant, every servant, every alpha would know the truth. The Alpha King had fallen in love with Serena. And somewhere inside the castle, someone had betrayed him. The kingdom erupted before dawn. And the first casualty would be the fragile future Serena had only just begun to believe might be possible. Chapter 5. The cruelest wounds are not always inflicted by enemies. Sometimes they come from hope. Because hope has a way of convincing people that happiness is within reach, only to rip it away the moment they reach for it. And as dawn broke over the kingdom, Serena learned exactly how painful that could be. The leaked letters spread faster than wildfire. By sunrise, copies had reached every corner of the capital. By noon, they had crossed into neighboring territories. And by evening, the entire kingdom knew. Not rumors. Not speculation. Not gossip. Truth. The Alpha King loved her. The words stared back from every copied page. Words written late at night. Words never intended to be read. Words never intended to leave his desk. Simple observations. Fragments of thoughts. Pieces of a heart Kael had spent years hiding. She smiled today. I don't think she realizes how brave she is. Sometimes I wonder if loneliness recognizes itself. She deserves far more than this kingdom has ever given her. Each sentence felt painfully intimate, painfully honest, painfully real. And somehow, that made everything worse. Because now there was no denying it. The kiss hadn't been meaningless. The protection hadn't been meaningless. The way he looked at her hadn't been meaningless. Nothing had been meaningless. And that realization shattered her. Not because she doubted his feelings, but because she finally understood what they would cost him. The kingdom was furious. The nobles were furious. The council was furious. Not because the king loved someone, but because of who he loved. A servant. A rejected mate. A woman with no political value. No alliance. No strategic advantage. To them, Serena represented weakness. And kings were not allowed weaknesses. The attacks began immediately. Editorial pamphlets appeared throughout the capital. Council members demanded explanations. Allied alphas threatened to withdraw support. The Eastern Kingdom openly questioned the marriage alliance. Chaos spread through the political landscape. And every day, the pressure on Kael grew worse. Yet somehow, he never blamed her. Not once. Which only made leaving harder. The decision came 3 nights later. Long after midnight, the castle slept beneath a blanket of silence. Moonlight spilled across empty corridors. And Serena stood alone in her room. A small travel bag rested on her bed. Everything she owned fit inside it. A few dresses, a handful of books, several treasured memories. Nothing more, nothing less. Her eyes burned. Not from tears. Those had already come and gone, leaving only numbness behind. A soft knock interrupted the silence. She already knew who it was, because nobody else would visit at this hour. The door opened slowly. Kael entered. Neither spoke immediately. Neither seemed capable of it. The distance between them felt enormous, despite only being a few feet apart. Finally, the king looked toward the travel bag. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. You've decided. Not a question. A statement. Serena nodded. The silence that followed nearly broke her, because she wanted him to stop her. Wanted him to tell her she was wrong. Wanted him to give her a reason to stay. Instead, he simply closed his eyes. Just once. A brief moment. Yet somehow it looked like surrender. When he opened them again, the king looked older. More tired. More defeated. You'll be safer away from here. The words sliced through her heart, because she knew they were true. The letters had transformed her into a target. Not merely politically, physically, dangerously. Every enemy seeking to control the king now knew exactly where to strike. And that terrified him, far more than losing her. Because Kael had spent his entire life accepting personal pain. What he could not accept was placing her in danger. I never wanted this. Serena's voice barely rose above a whisper. I know. I didn't mean to ruin everything. The king stepped forward. One step. Only one. Yet it felt monumental. You ruined nothing. Emotion tightened his voice. Rare. Dangerous. Honest. The people responsible for this ruined everything. For several long seconds, they simply looked at each other. Two people standing on opposite sides of a future neither wanted. Neither could change. Then Serena did something unexpected. She reached for him. Not dramatically. Not passionately. Just gently. Her hand finding his. Warm fingers intertwining. Simple. Human. Real. Kael stared down at their joined hands, as though memorizing the feeling, as though preparing himself for losing it. And perhaps he was, because neither spoke when dawn approached. Neither spoke when her carriage arrived. Neither spoke when the gates opened. Words seemed inadequate, meaningless, pointless. Some heartbreaks existed beyond language. The carriage finally began moving. Slowly, painfully. Serena never looked back, because she knew if she did, she wouldn't leave. And Kael watched until the carriage disappeared completely. Long after everyone else had gone. Long after the road emptied. Long after there was nothing left to see. The king remained standing there, alone. Months passed. Winter arrived, then deepened. Snow blanketed the kingdom. Frost covered castle windows, and loneliness settled into every corner of their lives. For Serena, life became smaller, quieter. She returned to the remote village where she'd spent part of her childhood. A peaceful place nestled among forests and rolling hills. Safe, hidden, forgettable. Exactly what the king wanted. Exactly what she needed. At least, that's what she told herself. The truth was much uglier, because every morning she looked toward the road, and every evening she checked it again, without realizing she was doing it, without admitting why. At night she wrote letters, hundreds of them, letters she never intended to send. Today I saw the first snowfall. You would hate how cold it is here. A fox stole my breakfast this morning. You would have laughed. I miss you. The final sentence appeared most often. Sometimes written. Sometimes erased. Sometimes rewritten. Always true. Always unsent. Meanwhile, far away in the capital, the Alpha King suffered in his own way. Officially, he was busier than ever. Diplomatic meetings, trade negotiations, border inspections, council visits, territorial reviews. The list never ended. Curiously, many of those responsibilities now occurred near Serena's village, an observation his beta found endlessly amusing. The Northern Territories again? Kael ignored him. There's unrest. There are 6 sheep. The beta smirked. They seem very dangerous. Kael continued walking. The beta followed. Should we perhaps deploy the entire royal army? Silence. The beta grinned. Just to be safe. Kael finally stopped. His gaze darkened. Do you have work to do? Not nearly as much as you. The beta's amusement softened. Because beneath the teasing, he understood. Everyone understood. The king had become a ghost of himself. Still functioning. Still ruling. Still leading. But only technically. Part of him remained elsewhere. Part of him remained with her. Neither moved on. Neither healed. Neither forgot. And perhaps that was the most painful part. Because months passed. Yet nothing changed. Not really. The longing remained. Growing. Deepening. Becoming impossible to ignore. Then came spring. And with it, disaster. The morning began peacefully. Sunlight filtered through the forest. Birdsong drifted through open windows. The village felt safe. Ordinary. Serena spent the afternoon helping an elderly neighbor repair fencing near the edge of town. Simple work. Simple life. For a brief moment, she almost felt content. Almost. Then she heard it. A sound. Sharp. Unnatural. Wrong. The crack of a crossbow. Instinct screamed. Danger. Too late. The bolt exploded through the wooden fence beside her head. Wood splintered. Villagers screamed. Chaos erupted instantly. A second bolt followed. Then a third. Targeted. Precise. Deliberate. Not random. Not robbery. Not coincidence. Someone was trying to kill her. The realization hit like ice water. Across the ridgeline, a shadow disappeared into the trees. Professional. Prepared. Gone before anyone could react. Serena's pulse thundered. Her hands trembled. Because suddenly she understood. The danger hadn't vanished. It had only been waiting. And somewhere far away, a rider was already racing toward the capital, carrying a message that would shatter the Alpha King's world. Someone had finally made their move. And this time, Serena might not survive long enough for him to save her.